Schuster Rabbanim, Schuster everybody who came out tonight on this freezing night. Thank you very much. I'd like to start as well by acknowledging the sponsors for tonight's evening, the 2 tablets of the St. Louis Kollel, the Ahavas Chesed Society, led by Mrs. Penina Glassman, a donation in the Schus of Tova Bas for Fuhr Shlem of Tova Bas Esther, the Aguda, the U-City Shul, and the Young Israel. Thank you very much. As Dr. Zephyr mentioned, the 2 tablets is an ongoing program that right now is being held at St. Mary's right over here in Clayton. Usually it's geared towards a specific medical topic covered by a physician at first, and then I try to share some ideas from the Torah on the topic as well. It's open to the public. I urge whoever wants to attend could attend. Free parking, free attendance, ground floor, easy access. Ethics credits are available whether you're in the medical profession or any other profession. A reciprocal form can be filled out and get a ethics credit. I encourage everyone to attend. Tonight we have a little bit of a different program. As we know, we have the supposed of having a Elchonon Zohn come in to meet with us and share with us from his almost 40 years of experience dealing with these crucial issues. Zohn now is functioning as the director of the Chevra Kadisha of the Vada Rabbanim of Queens, and as well, he's the founder and president of the National Association of the Chevra Kadisha. I don't know if there's a Chevra Kadisha in North America today that has not been influenced by Rav Zohn's guidance, psak, either directly or already by his students or his students that are training the various Misaskim and those people who are involved in this holy work. It's really a schus. Although I haven't had the schus till now to personally meet Rav Zohn, but I've heard his name growing up numerous times from both my grandfathers who were community rabbanim for most of their life in the Queens area, and they often would tell me that anything that come up in regard to the Chevra Kadisha issues, Rav Zohn already at that point, as a younger man, as a bach already, and as a young man, and then developing further and further, became the expert on all these areas. Zohn himself is a Chashva Talmid Chacham, a Talmid Muvak of the Rosh Hashiva of Henech Leibos of Chafetz Chaim, Banim Shel Kedoshim. His father of Shachar Zohn Zatzal was from the big Talmidim of the Chafetz Chaim, or Baruch Ber, and merited Arichas Yomim to live to be over 100 in Eretz Yisrael. The format for tonight, Rabbi Zohn will be leading the class, and I'll be standing on the side and feeding him some of the questions and issues that brought up. If there are questions as we go along, I'm happy to try to field some of them. Obviously, won't be able to field all of them during the program. For people who would like to discuss it more afterwards, Rabbi Zohn will be available after the program for further questions. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Rabbi Zohn to please come in. You hear me with this one? Okay. The first issue we'd like to discuss tonight is how do we view the role of the Shul Rav regarding helping to make end-of-life decisions? Are there reasons to challenge the medical decisions that often the medical team might be advising the patient and their family? When does one know the appropriate time to call the Rav for assistance in planning the funeral? Or when is an appropriate time to call the Rav to say vidui with the patient?
Thank you, Rabbi Kowalsky. There are a lot of questions. Hopefully, we will be able to cover them. The role of the Rav really begins with education before any end-of-life decisions have to be made. I think the concept of Parshas Vayechi, which we just had, that Team Shabbos concept, was actually a concept that I first introduced in Queens in the early 1980s, when I first became the head of the Chevra Kadisha, and I realized that most people, even people who daven in shuls that are from shuls, knew very little about end-of-life issues, what needs to be done, what are the reasons for what we do, and frankly, it's hard to believe that in New York City in 1971, when the Chevra Kadisha of the Vada Rabbanim was formed, less than 5% of the Jews in Queens actually had Tahara. They went to Jewish funeral homes, they might have assumed there was a Tahara, but it wasn't being done. So the role of the Rav is really, begins with education. To educate the community about all of the issues that are to be learned, that are to be addressed regarding end of life. And that has a lot of different components. There is the medical part of the end of life issues, which we'll talk about more. The being prepared with halachic living wills, what those are. There is the education to the fact that medical issues themselves need the guidance of a Rav, need the guidance of halacha. Many people may not fully appreciate that these decisions require direction from a Rav. So education on all of these issues is extremely important. And the role of the Rav continues really every step of the way. I mean, I'll take it a little bit out of order. Saying vidui with a person who is ill. Now we think of persons, I got a call a few days ago. Actually, I think the family maybe has just gotten up from Shiva. But I got a call from someone about 2 hours before someone was nifter. Do you think I should say vidui with them yet? I mean, this person was sick for many, many years. And now they realized it's about to happen. And the question was, should we say vidui? I don't know if everyone knows what vidui is, but vidui is, I don't want to call it the last rites, but vidui is what we say with someone before they pass away, where they ask the Ribbon Shalom that if they ask God, that if this is the time when they are supposed to pass away, that they should be, that their passing should be a kapara, should atone for any sins that they had. Death is an opportunity for kapara. And we need one of the parts of kapara is to actually verbalize it, to say that I sinned and Rabbi Shalom forgive me. So it's an extremely important thing to do. And Rabbi need to teach people that this is something new. There was a woman in my Chevra Kadisha who I must have said vidui with 5 times. The last time was literally hours before she passed away, and she was already unable to speak. But I said vidui with her when she had surgeries earlier on, and she went in before those surgeries, and she wasn't sure how she would come out. And she called me to say vidui with her. So we tell people that saying vidui doesn't mean we're giving up. We don't want anyone to lose hope. And that's what the halacha says. We tell them, many people said vidui and didn't die, and many people didn't say vidui and did die. It's a zechus if you say vidui. So these are the kind of things that Rabbanim, I think, need to teach, and people need to know. They have to reach out to for Rabbanim. One of the things I encourage Rabbanim to do is to put into the bulletin of the shul, of every shul, that at any time of serious illness or any time of, certainly when someone passes away, the first call should really come to the Rav. If a shul has a cemetery committee or a Chevra Kadisha committee, you may want to call them at the same time or shortly thereafter. Maybe it would be back-to-back calls, but the Rav needs to be there every step of the way. In New York, very often the Rav gets a call from the funeral director, your member passed away and the funeral's tomorrow at 10 o'clock, can you make it? That's not the role of the Rav. There are many decisions that have to be made, even when to have the funeral. Sometimes people postpone funerals for reasons that are inappropriate. Sometimes people, where are people going to sit shiva? Whom do you wait for? Whom don't you wait for? There are so many things that may need discussion, may need direction. So the role of the Rav is really constant throughout the process of illness and end of life across the board. It's also an opportunity for Rabbanim to be able to bond with families in many instances and get closer to families and families to get closer to a Rav. So all of these things are important. Are there reasons to challenge the medical decisions that a medical team may be recommending? Just at the table tonight, it was brought up, there was a doctor at the table, and one of the Rabbanim, I think it was Rabbi Greenblatt, was thanked the doctor for being able to provide the direction that sometimes a Rav needs when there are medical decisions to be made. The medical world, we know, while they're doing heroic things and creating new types of treatment and things that really never existed, where they're able to save so many people, at the same time, the culture is such that quality of life is what defines life. And if a person no longer has quality of life, and this is not only true in the United States, it's true across the world. Maybe Europe actually is leading that direction, that cultural shift. You find it in Eretz Yisrael. I discovered that my father's Zichron Livracha was 101 years old and in the hospital for the third time with pneumonia, and they were telling us to just let him go. And there was a man who had put out a sefer 3 or 4 months before this, and was fully aware and still giving shiur on a regular basis. So this is there is a time where the Rav needs to, I don't know if challenge is the right word, but certainly to question, and may have to reach out to assistance from medical professionals as well, but you need to reach out to medical professionals who have an understanding of the Torah view of life and the value of life and the value of a minute of life. And so that is certainly part of the role of the Rav. We'll talk about halachic medical directives, and the Rav plays a very important role in those living wills, in those halachically prepared living wills. So that is all part of the role of the Rav. As I think we covered this already, when does one call the Rav for assistance in planning the funeral? Immediately. A Rav needs to also be, I don't know if that was part of the question of Kowalsky, but the point is a Rav needs to be reachable. At least in an emergency, there has to be a way to reach them. If we're going to ask the people in the community to reach out, they have to be able to be reached at least within a reasonable amount of time. Certainly once they know there's an emergency, but even before, to have a way to be able to be reached in those situations that the community feels comfortable reaching out to them. But a community needs to be taught that all of these things require direction from a rabbinic authority. And it begins with illness, preparing for illness, how to prepare for illness, and straight through from the time that a person is approaching death. Hospice. Should people go into hospice? Should they not go into hospice? What is hospice? What are we allowed to do in the hospice situation? There are so many decisions that have to be made. Do we continue medication? Do we continue treatment? Do we continue hydration and nutrition? These are all serious shilas that need rabbinic guidance.
Continuing with this idea, so what exactly is a halachic living will, and why is it so necessary? And who should one name as a proxy, as a medical on the directive? Does it have to be a family member? Is there any Torah Shabbat Peh, any oral things that should be given over to the family that might not be written specifically on the will?
A halachic medical directive, many hospitals will require, before a person goes into the hospital for a procedure, a living will. The hospital wants direction. We know in this country there is something called patient autonomy. A patient has a right to direct the medical treatment that they are going to get. That is an entitlement that we have. And therefore the hospital wants to know what to do in certain situations, especially if it's a serious procedure, but sometimes even a non-serious procedure suddenly turns serious. and the person may not be able to speak for themselves. So they want direction. And the typical living will that is not a living will that is a halachic medical directive, but is a form that is a living will. There are some called a pulsed form and a mulched form. These are forms different states have. What these forms have is a checklist. I don't want to be put on a respirator, or I do want to be put on a respirator. I do not want to be resuscitated. I do want to be resuscitated. In this situation, I do not want to be on a feeding tube. In that situation, I do, I don't. You have choices. Check off one from column A, one from column B. What do you like? What don't you like? Now, these are people making these decisions sometimes very early on in life, but even if it's later in life, they're in a typical situation, filling out a form in the office of an estate planner or in the medical office or in a hospital before some surgery. How in the world could someone make a decision what should be done and what should not be done just because that's how they feel right now? From a halachic perspective, that makes no sense. It's really, I don't know if it makes sense from any perspective, but from a halachic perspective, it certainly makes no sense because there are so many variables involved. What are the chances of recovery? There are, what is, and how low would that recovery be? And on and on and on. There are so many, someone may not like the idea of a feeding tube. No one likes the idea of a feeding tube, but I had a brother-in-law, he was nifter, it's still within the year. He had a feeding tube for 5 years. And I will tell you that those 5 years, this man had in fact, I think from the time that he put in a feeding tube, his love for life grew. Maybe because he just had life, there wasn't much else. But this man enjoyed everything every time someone came to see him, every little thing that he was able to do, whether it was davening, whether it was sitting at a meal and singing the Shabbos song, whatever it was. And he had 5 years of additional life. He saw grandchildren, he saw great-grandchildren. He saw a tremendous amount of nachas, but he also served Hashem in an unbelievable way. And the truth is that we know in halacha, a life that is lived in difficulty may be the most valuable life. That's life that is, it's not all in numbers, it's how we use it. When the person Chazal say, our sages teach us, Pam B'tzar, one time that we do something when it's difficult is Shalom B'tzar. It's worth 100 times when it's not difficult. It's the quality of life is not by how much we enjoy it, but how much we live it according to the way we are meant to live it, how much we are serving Hashem. If a person lives with difficulty and accepts it, it's unbelievable. That really is the most qualitative life, but it's not how we define that in the world. So these are issues that are really important, and the halachic medical directive says the following. The concept of the halachic medical directive actually came about both through the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, as well as the Agudas Yisrael of America, and they both did it a little differently originally, and in the end, the Rabbinical Council pretty much came around to do exactly what the Aguda said the Aguda was doing, which is, rather than choosing one from column A and one from column B, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, in this situation do this, in that situation do that, you don't do that. But what the halachic medical directive does is it does two things. Number one, patient autonomy ends when a person can't speak for themselves. So if they have a living will where they filled something out, then that living will is the directive that speaks for them, and that becomes their autonomy based on what they wrote in that living will, what they checked off, what they signed on. However, in halacha, you can't do that. Therefore, the halachic medical directive says, this person, my agent, my proxy, my shaliach, should make the medical decisions for me. And whatever they decide, that's what I want. I am giving them the power to speak on my behalf, and the law recognizes that as being the decisions of the patient themselves. So the law allows us to provide a proxy, an agent that will act on our behalf. We'll talk in a minute who that proxy should be. But then, in terms of deciding what to do and what not to do, how is the proxy going to know what is halachically acceptable? So the directive indicates which rabbi you would like to have this proxy consult with and make the decisions. Now what that does is it says the proxy will defer to this rabbi, and you're stating that whatever this rabbi says is the halachically correct thing to do, is what you want. So rather than say one from column A, one from column B, you said all of those that are in the column that this rabbi approves. I don't want anything this rabbi does not approve. And that's it. And that's how it works. We generally have an alternate proxy so that if one isn't available, there's a second one. And those proxies then assume all the power that the patient himself has. Now, it's very important when you're choosing a proxy to choose someone who, A, has an understanding of these kind of situations, someone who can keep their mind, keep their cool, can make decisions, someone who obviously is a bardas, someone who is intelligent enough to be able to do it. But there are other things to look for. You want someone that is going to follow what you want them to do. You want someone that you believe you are comfortable with is going to do the right thing and is going to reach out to the rabbi. You want someone that might live near you that will have the time to deal with the medical situation. Okay, if there's someone knowledgeable in the medical field, that's certainly something to consider. Okay, if you have two proxies, an alternate proxy, you want them to be able to work together. You want them to be people who are able to coordinate with each other. So there are a lot of factors, there's a multitude of factors. The ability to make decisions, someone who knows you and what you want, someone you trust, someone who can work with the other proxy and with the Rav. It's kind of a package. You can't just fill in names. You need to give it thought. So before you fill out a halachic medical directive, you have to really think about who that proxy will be. And if you can't come up with two, leave one. But it should be that person that you feel most comfortable with, most capable, most available, most willing. Don't put in a proxy that you never told is the proxy. I can't tell you how many people call me up and say, Rabbi Zohn, I made you my proxy. Or I made you my rabbi. I said, thank you. I don't agree. I mean, I don't mean to be facetious. I mean, sometimes I just know I don't have the time for certain things. Sometimes I do agree. Sometimes I don't agree. Depends who it is. Depends what the situation is. I'm certainly, I'm not the posek. I'm not the Rav necessarily, except for a few people, which I did because of whatever reason it was. But you certainly need to coordinate with them. So those are things that you have to deal with. The Agudah will halachic medical directive and the Rabbinical Council of America are almost identical today. There's one difference. And that is that the Agudah's will is specific to 18, I believe, different states. And the language was made specific based on the law or the regulations as they are written in those states. So Missouri has its own state in the Agudah Halachic Medical Directive, but the RCA Medical Directive is basically a one-size-fits-all. And will it work? It's probably worth showing to a lawyer to take a look and see if in fact it will work in your state, and maybe certain words have to be changed, whatever it might be. But either of those are fine, and we would certainly encourage that everyone, by the way, halachic medical directives do not start at the age of 60 or 70. The Wall Street Journal about 3 years ago had an article, everyone over 18 should have a they said a living will. They should have a living will. Why? Because if chas v'sholom, a kid of 18 falls off a bike and has some kind of an injury where they can't speak, for whatever reason, even in most states, even their parents have no legal right to make decisions where it goes against the medical decisions that the hospital decides is the right thing to do, and their ethics committee makes a decision that under these circumstances, this is what needs to be done, or this is what does not need to be done. The family wants to do it differently. It's why we read about all these stories in the papers. A few weeks ago in Toronto, there were hundreds of people in court when a family challenged a young man who had a son developed an infection, became very, very seriously ill, and they were going to pull the plug. And they went to court, and hundreds of people showed up in court to show support for this family that was challenging the medical decisions, because there was no healthcare proxy. You need to have the healthcare proxy. I mean, there's a video that's on our website, NAC.org. You can take a look, called Preparation, Awareness and Preparation. And there's a friend of mine who's a doctor who lives in my neighborhood who is a cardiologist. And he's talking about his sister who was dying in Sloan Kettering, and he was getting upset from his Rav that they should or should not do certain things, and the hospital absolutely refused to go along, even though he's a doctor, because he was not her official healthcare proxy. Okay? So these are the kind of things that we need to know, and it's not for older people, it's for everyone. As the Wall Street Journal put it, it should be a rite of passage. As soon as someone reaches 18, they should have a halachic living will, halachic medical directive. So that, did I miss anything? Now, who could be a healthcare proxy? It certainly can be anyone. It could be a spouse, if a spouse is up to it. It could be a family member. It could be a friend. It could be anyone. As far as the witnesses who sign, I believe it is better that it not be, certainly anyone who's listed on your halachic medical directive cannot be a witness for that medical directive. But also it is better to have people who are not family members if possible. Not that it puzzles them to be witnesses, but it adds credibility. I was told by lawyers they would suggest that it not be a family member that signs these types of documents.
Thank you. If one fills out a halachic living will in one state, and then moves to a different state, you recommend redoing the will?
Chances are they will honor it. For a lot of people, by the way, it's not just moving. It's people who live in Florida part of the year. They live in, they have a bungalow in Pennsylvania part of the year. And they have, live in Borough Park the rest of the year. So these are all difficult things, but I think generally they will honor cross-state, documents. But certainly if someone moves, in general, we recommend that a living will, any living will, but certainly a halachic living will as well, should be reviewed every 5 or 10 years. First of all, things may have changed, information may have changed, situations of the people you named may have changed, and so it is worth reviewing. And if you move to another state, it's a good time to review it and to maybe change it. That's certainly true. I will tell you the following. Eretz Yisrael is a question that people ask. I remember sitting in my father's living room, actually it was dining room, and the question came, he was reading about my promotion of living wills. There was an article in one of the papers, and he was asking me about it, and he said, do we need this in Eretz Yisrael? And my nephews who were sitting in the room and lived in Eretz Yisrael, had been to the hospital with him many times, says, nah, we don't need this in Eretz Yisrael. We've been to the hospital many times, it was never necessary, we don't need this. And I bought it. It was a terrible mistake. The reason they didn't need it is because every time they were in the hospital with him, my father was able to talk and basically made his own decisions. So they might have spoken to the doctors for him, but he was the one making the decisions, and they knew that. Very different world. When we went into the hospital with my father the last time, he had that pneumonia that I was talking about. He couldn't talk for himself. They sedated him, and they intubated him, and he was not able to speak. And at that time, the fact that he did not have a healthcare proxy, not even indirectly, but very directly, basically caused his death. Now, of course, we believe that he was meant to die when he died, because that's what we are. Ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, we believe in God. God is the one who carries the key to life and death. But in terms of what actually happened was, I had been to Eretz Yisrael, the entire family was there. We didn't even realize it. They had us come down right after he was brought into the hospital, was intubated, because they wanted to do a certain procedure, and they wanted all the children there. We thought they're calling us down because they thought he was not going to survive the procedure, and therefore they wanted everyone there. The fact was, since he did not have a healthcare proxy, they wanted all the 5 children who were all equally able to make those decisions, because in Israel they do have decisions, they do have a hierarchy, and so they wanted all the children there because there was no healthcare proxy. In the end, I left, I came home, it was on a Wednesday, and they were telling me that they were going to have to put in a tracheostomy. They were going to have to, because he had been on a tube for so long, they had to do a trach, what they call a tracheal procedure, to open an opening in the throat so that he could breathe through a respirator through the throat. By the way, at that time, his pneumonia was fine. He actually was off medication. The medication was ending, and he was breathing, I think, at that time, maybe 40% on his own. And by the time, after Shabbos, it was 60% on his own, but he still needed the respirator. And so I came home on a Wednesday, and on Shabbos, and they were supposed to do this on Friday. Well, on Shabbos, I got a fax that said that they need me to sign these forms and have them notarized and sent back, because I have to make my sister in Eretz, one of my sisters in Eretz Yisrael, his official healthcare proxy. I have to sign off on her being the proxy. Okay? Well, what happened was, by the time we were able to get it back, it was already too late for Sunday. And Monday morning, they took this to the Kupat Cholim, and they had the Kupat Cholim, which is the insurance company in Eretz Yisrael, and they had a meeting, and they approved the papers. At that time, it was too late in the day, so it was too late to do the procedure. They pushed it off till Tuesday. Tuesday morning, something got stuck in the pipe, in the respirator, and for about 30 seconds, he stopped breathing. Doctor came in, looked at it, said he's fine, but I recommend that we push off the procedure because we don't want to do this at his age after such a trauma. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, he developed an infection. That was on Tuesday. He was niftar on Thursday. It became septic, and that was the end. And as one of my friends who was a doctor in New York, and this doctor that deals with elder care said to me, and I said to this in a shame, he said, don't you realize they wanted this? They were pushing for this. They just wanted to push this off. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the fact is, we need a healthcare proxy in Eretz Yisrael. You need it everywhere. It's something that everyone should have. That's the bottom line. There was one thing that I think I missed when I had in Torah Shabbal Peh that you asked me, which I didn't get to. Is there anything, when you're filling out a healthcare proxy, is there anything that you need to say or need to instruct people with? The one thing that is important, you need to tell the healthcare proxy what you feel. You don't sign one from column A, one from column B, this is what I want, I don't want this, I do want that. But you have the right to tell them, I don't want heroics. If halacha does not require it, and if I'm in pain, I don't want to necessarily be put through it. A person might say, under all circumstances, I want to live every minute that I possibly can. Under all circumstances, there are times within halacha that a person's own feelings are taken into consideration. So you need to express those feelings to the proxy and to the Rav, and there's nothing wrong with writing that in on the halachic medical directive and making that statement, so that it will be some kind of a guide to the proxy and to the Rav. But certainly to say, I want something or don't want something that is contrary to halacha, that you cannot do. But to give them those parameters is appropriate.
What is an MS card, and how does that work together with the healthcare proxy?
Okay, our organization, and I think there are some out of, an MS card. MS is, stands for Emergency Medical Education and Sign-Up. It is a card that is the size of a credit card, and it has on it a statement that you sign to, that you put your signature to. First of all, it lists the proxy and the contact information of that proxy. It also has the information of an alternate proxy, how to contact them, their address, their phone number, and so on. It also has the name of the Rav listed in your halachic medical directive. And it has all kinds of statements in it. It says that, first of all, I have a medical directive, and that certain things should be done in an emergency where the Rav or the proxy cannot be reached. And then it is an objection to autopsy unless a person has chosen to be an organ donor, which is another question completely. They have that, if they have an organ donor card, the organ donor card will override this statement. But otherwise it says, I object to the autopsy of my body. It also says, I object to the cremation of my body. Now let me tell you why these things are important. Cremation may sound very strange, but I will tell you that there are many states, in the United States today, if someone happens to be in a place where no one claims their body after a week, they cremate them. This is true in California, it's true in many states, particularly in the West. This is what the world does today because cremation is so acceptable. Cremation has passed 50% in the United States as of about a year ago. More than 50% of Americans are being cremated. And therefore, this is the thing to do. In New York, there's Potter's Field. But in California, after a week, people are cremated. Someone has this in their pocket, okay? Even if no one claims the body, they will not be able to do so. That's number one. Number two, in this same state of California, we unfortunately were dealing with a case about 3 weeks ago, a young man who never was troubled and was involved with drugs and overdosed. He was a young person, I think he was 27, he was visiting California, he didn't live there, and the family called me to ask me to intercede to see if we could stop an autopsy. And in New York, we have a law that protects, allows for, it requires every coroner, medical examiner in New York State to accommodate an objection on religious grounds. And in a case like this, they would draw some blood, it wouldn't be an autopsy, it wouldn't be necessary. This law in California, which by the way was a tremendous accomplishment, HaKadosh Yisrael worked on it very hard. That law says, if someone has something in writing that says that they object to autopsy, they will accommodate. But if there's nothing in writing, even if there are parents, there are spouses, there are children, there are siblings, it makes no difference. It has to be in their own writing. And so whatever we could do, we could not stop the autopsy, unfortunately, but if this person had an MS card in his pocket, it would have been, it would have carried the day. They would not have had to have an autopsy. Another thing I will tell you is that in many states, there are now laws that are being promulgated. I believe it has passed in a few states, but I believe that within a few years, this will be the law in many states, as it is in most of Europe today. And that is that organ donation is the automatic default. Right now, people have a choice on the back of their driver's licenses. They can choose yes or no, and if it's a no, if it's not written clearly, then they don't say yes, they don't opt in. They can't make them organ donors. The default is going to be very soon that it automatically is that you are an organ donor unless you have something opting out. The MS card will be able to work for you in that regard. The beauty of this card is that it attaches to your license. We created a little sleeve. It's a little plastic sleeve that has 2 pockets. On one side, your license goes, and right above it, it says, see emergency medical instructions in back in red ink, so that if anyone is ever in a situation where they are found and they have this card with them, they will find the MS card, they will find the information necessary about the proxy, the alternate proxy, the rabbi, all the contact information. It's very, very simple, and it's very worthwhile to have, and that is something that we created that you're welcome to have or to email us, and we'll be happy to send them to you at no charge. So that is what the MS card is. Okay.
Thank you. So if anybody wants an MS card, we have a Zohn board with them here at Stack, and I have them available after the lecture. Moving on to the next topic.
Again, I just want to interrupt. The MS card, in and of itself, is not a halachic medical directive. It says, I have a medical directive, and it lists the information on that directive. It is not a legal document as far as being a medical directive. It's not the RCA form and the Aguda form and the MS card. They're not three equal things. The MS card just has the information that exists on your medical directive, and it does have legal power as far as the objection to autopsy, to cremation. It also names the person who's your agent to be the person to have decisions post-mortem and so on. It has a lot of very valuable information on it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. If anybody needs the Missouri Halachic Medical Directive, it's available on Rabbi Zohn's website, or they can contact me and I can get it for them. The next topic to discuss is that we're all familiar that a mace has a tahara before burial. What is this? What is the basic procedure? Should one try to convince irreligious family members to have one? What are some of the spiritual benefits of having it done? And if one is going to be buried in a different state, where should the tahara be done?
Okay. You're very fortunate in this community, we were just talking about it, that many of the cemeteries require a tahara before burial. That was put into the bylaws of the cemetery when the cemetery was created, and therefore you couldn't have what you have in New York, where only 5% of people had tahara, because you had to have a tahara before people were buried in cemeteries here. Many communities are fortunate to have that. But a tahara is basically preparation with tremendous kavod. A tahara is the traditional preparation by a Chevra Kadisha in accordance with our Masorah, with our minhagim, with our traditions. Tahara is made up of a few parts. There is the very respectful washing of the person. First of all, it's men taking care of men, women taking care of women. It is done as a tremendous sense of responsibility and as a mitzvah. And great respect is shown the person. First of all, it's done by a few people who move this person, carry this person with tremendous respect, as opposed to being done by a funeral director, usually one person, doing it in a way that is not necessarily very respectful. It's just a whole different concept. Okay, for the typical funeral director, the goal is what it looks like. It's the end. So if they can put on a little makeup and put on a nice suit and present the body very nicely, that's important. What's going on underneath really doesn't matter because no one's going to see it. That's not what a tahara is. A tahara is a very respectful washing, cleaning of the person, as is brought down in all the Sfarim, like we would wash ourselves before a Shabbos or a Yantif, so that the person is clean, that the person is respectful, is treated respectfully. That's number one. Number two, there is a part of it which is an immersion in a mikveh. Most places don't have a mikveh, so it's the pouring of a certain amount of water which is equal to that, which is metaher, which purifies the body in a certain sense from certain types of impurities, certain types of tumah. After the tahara, a kohen is still not allowed to go in and touch the body or be in the same place as the body because it's not that tumah that is removed. But there are other types of tumah that are removed. And then there is the dressing of the body in tachrichim, in shrouds. I will tell you that for most people who resist tahara, they don't understand it. It's because of the shrouds. They don't necessarily want their loved one dressed in shrouds. As we were talking about before, people want to do what's best for their loved one, but they don't know what's best for their loved one. To them, having them in their favorite jogging suit is really what's most appropriate. It's why people get buried with golf clubs in their hands, because that's what, they love golfing, and so that's the thing to do. It's chesed that is not defined by Torah, not defined by truth. And so tahara is First of all, everything that we do in the Tahara process reflects all of our basic beliefs. The fact that what we take with us are the good deeds that we do. It's not the money that we have. There is, a nice set of tachrichim is a set of tachrichim that is made of nice linen, because that's what the high priest, what the Kohen Gadol wore when he went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, when he went into the holiest of holies on Yom Kippur. We believe that when a person dies, they're going to their final Yom Kippur. So that's the appropriate dress. It's based on that understanding. It's made of linen because that's what the Kohen Gadol wore. It's made of white linen because that symbolizes purity. It symbolizes being clean, pure, without sin. White is that which symbolizes purity. There are no pockets, there are no cuffs, because we can't take anything with us. There are no knots in the tachrichim if they're made appropriately. They're made by hand. There is no knots. Why? Because we believe that it's only temporary. Mashiach will be here very soon, and they'll be getting up to Yesamesim. So we don't knot this. It's not a permanent set of clothes. Okay, these are the kind of things that are built into every part of the Tahara process based on our basic beliefs. And we need to understand it, because sometimes we need to explain it to people who don't understand it. So we ourselves really need to understand it. We have some brochures out that explain some of these traditions. I don't know how much time we have, but I have there's a story that I told this morning, and I'll repeat it. I spoke at the yeshiva this morning for high school kids. Hard to talk to high school kids for an hour straight about anything, but certainly about death or end of life. Not exactly something that's on their radar. So I had to tell a good story. So I told the story about, it's a story actually I once wrote up for the OU, but it's a story about a woman who called me, but sorry, Shabbos, I actually called her husband died, and I called her on the phone and I said to her, what's your husband's Jewish name? And she said to me, Rabbi, take good care for my husband, he's a big tzaddik. So it kind of surprised me, not something you often hear, and I said, what do you mean? I figured it was a Rosh Hashiva I'd never heard of. No, she says, my husband was in World War I in American Army, never missed a day of putting on tefillin. Let me tell you, that's a tremendous accomplishment. He wasn't in his own right, he was a tzaddik. But when I came to do that tahara about an hour later, the field director says, Rabbi, leave him on the table. So what's the matter? The casket didn't arrive? He says, no, we have a casket, but we're dressing him in a suit afterwards. I said, what? This is a psak that we have for Moshe Feinstein's Chol Levarcha. The family does not want to do a tahara, particularly because of the clothing, because of the tachrichim, that you can leave the tachrichim on and then put the clothing over the tachrichim. It's a compromise. But for this tzaddik, it didn't make sense. Here was a guy who was a tzaddik, he put on film every day, and his wife said he was a Shomer Torah mitzvahs. It just didn't sound right. So I went to the film director. I said, what's going on? He says, I don't know, they brought it in. I said, do you mind if I call the family? I called the wife, and I spoke to her. I said, I just spoke to you an hour ago. You told me your husband. She says, Rabbi, it's not me. It's my daughter. My daughter insists on having his suit. I can't fight with her no more. I said, do you mind if I call your daughter? So I called the daughter. And I said to her, your father was a very religious man in his own way. And you know that that's not the traditional. She says, Rabbi, you didn't know my father. I was waiting to hear who knows what. She says, my father was a religious man, but he was the nattiest dresser that ever lived. He was retired, spent all his free time shopping. Had money, spent time shopping, only bought the best. Didn't always buy, but what he bought was the best. It says every night for 45 minutes, he laid out his wardrobe for the next day. He would take out this tie and this shirt, then he would put back this shirt and take a different shirt and a different tie and a different socks, and everything had to match exactly, and this was who he was. He says, I can't see him being buried in shrouds. So I said to her, the Rebbe Shalom sometimes sends you an inspiration. I said to her, what did he wear when he went swimming? She says, designer trucks. I said, what did he wear when he went to sleep? She says, silk pajamas. I said, you know the suit that you brought to Parkside? I said, why didn't he wear that when he went swimming or went to bed? It's a beautiful suit. She says, Rabbi, my father just passed away. Why are you making fun of this? I said, I'll explain to you. I said, your father was always appropriately dressed. I said, what is appropriate dress for this occasion? I said, for your father who believed in God, believed in the Olam Haba, and believed in the Schar V'Yonos, believed that he's standing for his final Yom Kippur, the appropriate dress is white linen tachrichim, like the Kohen Gadol wore. And that's appropriate. Anything else is inappropriate. I said, you know what the funny thing was? I said, because there are two kinds of tachrichim. There's linen tachrichim, which is the more traditional tachrichim, and there is simple muslin tachrichim. I said, because they're putting him in that suit, you know what shrouds they put out for him? They put out the muslin shroud. Why waste a good set of linen if they're putting the suit over it? I said to her, you know, your father wouldn't have been caught dead in those shrouds. And that was, by the way, that was the name of the article that was written, wouldn't be caught dead in those shrouds. Okay? And I'll tell you the truth, she started crying. She says, Rabbi, I'll pick up the suit, dress it in the right shrouds. And that's what it was. But the idea is if we understand, we're able to explain it. And it's important because we're living in a world where people are making decisions based on what the culture tells them is appropriate. So they cremate, so they don't have to hurry. But of course, the answer is yes, we should explain to them how important tahara is. We believe that a person, when they die, they stand before the Ribbono Shel Olam, and that they stand at that time as they are in the kever. As they are in the grave, the same way they look in the grave. You know, the Chavetz Chaim said that all of technology is for us to be able to understand the things that years ago people understood because it was in their bones, it was in their mother's milk, it was the Risora. We need to have visual aids, so we know you can see a screen, something that's going on elsewhere. That's how it is. A man and a woman appears before God, dressed as they are in the kever. And therefore, it's appropriate to understand. It's why we're also careful the tachrichim should look nice, they should be clean, and so on and so forth. So that is something that, yes, should be known. And of course, to carry this a little further, in today's world, you need to reach out to people who might be considering cremation and to explain to them the importance of being buried in a Jewish cemetery, not in a mausoleum, in the ground, that this is the greatest covet. This is closure for the family. This is the last thing we can do for them in this world. Having a family there to be there at the Levaya to give them that covet is a tremendous source of comfort to them. We need to start talking to people who are not from. Not that the Torah tells us we need to bury. We need to talk to them about a guf and a neshama, that we are spirits, that we have a neshama, that we have a soul, that we're not just physical human beings that live like other animals live, that we are different. V'shvili nifra olam, the world was created for us. We are special. We have something that is a part of God within us. We need to talk. The average non-frum Jew does not know that we believe in an afterlife. Certainly they don't believe in Tchias HaMesim. The Reform took it out in the Siddur. They don't believe in Tchias HaMesim. They don't believe in Schar V'Yonos. This is what we need to begin talking about, just in whatever form we possibly can. There's a book we had out there tonight about stories about the afterlife. Why did we create the book? Just as a segue into the conversation. Interesting stories about the afterlife. Just so that Jews will know that we believe in an afterlife, that we believe in Tchias HaMesim and Schar V'Yonos and all of these things. So we can explain to them the importance of Kfura, the fact that there are two parts. There's a pasuk in Koheles, at the end of Koheles, The dust, rabbis get up and say this, they don't even know what they're saying. The Reform rabbis get up and say, the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. That's what it is. What they don't realize is a two-step process. That's the way it works. When the person returns to the earth as it was, that provides atonement, and that provides as a chus for the person to eventually be able to return to God who gave it, to the neshama, to God where it came from. This is what we need to teach. So we need to talk about this. The Meis Mitzvah of our time is not dead. The Meis Mitzvah of our time is 50 or 60 and on his way to his or her lawyer to make a will to say, I will be cremated. That's when you need to address them before they die, before they're ill and you can't talk to them anymore. That's when you need to address it. Once they're dead, very, very difficult to get people to go against it. And what happens if, there's a question asked today, what happens if someone did make that will? Allah is very clear, you don't listen to them. It's something they don't have a right to. I'll tell you, a Chabad rabbi said this to me that was brilliant. Brilliant. He had a balabas, someone he was working with who was being mekarev, and his father died, and he left a will to be cremated. And this young man was torn. He wanted to listen to the rabbi to bury him, but he also knew that his father asked to be cremated. What do I do? So the rabbi at one point said to him, was your father an honest man? And he thought about it and he said, you know, my father was the most honest man I ever met. Honest to a fault. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, if someone gave your father a gift of a diamond, and then he gave it to his wife, or he gave it to someone else he loved, or whatever, and then years later, he finds out that this diamond was stolen. It didn't belong to the man who gave it to him. Would he take it back? Would he give it back? He thought about it and said, of course. He says, well, your father made a mistake. He thought that he had a right to choose cremation. He didn't. God gave us our bodies as a gift. It doesn't belong to us. Something we have a gift to use throughout our life. But he told us when we die, ki offer atov ve'offer toshuv, you have to return to the earth. That too is a gift. That's a process of kapara. That's a gift in itself. But our bodies do not belong to us. That's what you need to get across. We need to have conversation. It doesn't have to be about the Torah says. There are so many reasons. Just respect. Just to be in the cemetery where there's kevaros. And I will say this. I will say this to rabbanim and to chaplains and to people involved in hospice. Whoever is at a levaya where there are none from people present, don't lose that opportunity. Take 2 or 3 minutes at the levaya when you have the attention of the audience. When else can you talk about these things but at a levaya? Explain the pasuk in Koheles. Talk about the fact that the bodies returned to the earth is part of the process that allows the neshama to move on. Why is it that the Jews who are not from can read all kinds of Eastern culture books where they teach them about all kinds of spirits and all kinds of things and they believe cremation is the right thing? Why don't we tell them what we believe? Talk to them. And there's no better time than at a levaya where you have their attention. It's Indian, it's the right time to talk. Don't waste the opportunity. There's a question of what to talk about Shiva, at Shiva. I'm not going to talk, there are a lot of things to talk about, and hopefully we'll get there. But one thing I will tell you, if you're sitting at a house of Shiva, and there are none from people there, and you could take 2 or 3 minutes to talk about the levaya and how meaningful it was, and how much comfort it gave the family, and how respectful it was, and that people come back and visit a grave every so often and daven at a grave. And when someone gets cremated, even if they bury those ashes are not that person. There's nothing in ashes, no DNA in ashes, it has no religious significance, it has no legal significance, it has nothing. Halachically, you can take ashes and throw it in the garbage. There's no Indian of burying ashes. There's nothing in ashes. Do we even know whose ashes it is? You get back and learn what ashes. Whose ashes? What ashes? There's nothing in it. You don't know what ashes. But even if you did, it's relevant lahalacha. So these are the things that we need to teach Klal Yisrael. I'm sorry I got carried away.
How does one know where an appropriate place for them to be buried is? Many want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Many opt to be buried where their descendants, children, and grandchildren live. What are some of the considerations that a person should consult with the Rav about the proper place to be buried?
Very, very difficult question, and one that certainly a Rav should be consulted about. This week's Parsha, Chesed Shalevis, what was it that Yaakov asked Yosef to do? Don't bury me in Mitzrayim. Why would he want to bury him in Mitzrayim? There was very good reason to bury him in Mitzrayim, because the children of Yaakov were going to be there for hundreds of years in servitude, under very difficult circumstances. Wouldn't it be great for them to have the kever Yaakov to go to and daven? Interesting thought. I'll not take bury him in Mitzrayim. Emes said, don't bury me in Mitzrayim. It's a difficult question. Being buried in Eretz Yisrael is a tremendous zechus. When you're looking to buy a kever, certainly if you have a place where there is family, that's something to consider. It's a zechus and a covet to be buried with parents and grandparents. You have to know your own children. Some children need the strength and the connection and the bond of going to a kever. Some people don't. There was a man in my house a few months ago who buried his wife in a local cemetery, even though he had always thought about going to Eretz Yisrael. But one of his children was at a particularly difficult time, and he told me he decided that his child needed his wife's kever to be close by because he needed that ability to go visit the kever, and so he chose to have her buried here. This is the it's a difficult question with a lot of issues. There are all kinds of issues to consider when you're choosing a grave, even if you decide where it's going to be. First of all, this may not be in St. Louis. I don't know what the issues here are, but certainly what kind of knowledge do you have, or who's going to be in the next grave? Will they even have Jews in the next grave? Today there are a lot of Jews who aren't Jews. Okay, what requirements does the cemetery, what kind of monuments do they have? Do they bury on a holiday? Do they not bury on a holiday? Do they allow upright monuments or don't they allow upright monuments? There are a lot of things to consider when you do, and it's a good thing to consult a Rav for all these things, but it's not just a simple yes or no, this is better, that's better. Every situation has to be dealt with on its own merits, and there are a lot of things to think about. Is the cemetery itself a cemetery that is respectful? If there's water in the cemetery, which is a problem in many communities, it's a very serious issue halachically. It's not really considered k'vura kahalacha. According to Rav Moshe, it's a reason for disinterment. Those are things that need to be known. I don't think it's a problem necessarily in St. Louis, I hope not, but in many communities it is. These are the things, there are a lot of things to consider when you are choosing where to buy a grave, even if it's beyond the question of here or Eretz Yisrael. So there are a lot of different aspects to it, and you need to take all of those into consideration.
What is a halachic view on pre-planning a funeral? What does that mean from a Torah view, and what are some of the cost considerations one could factor in?
We know that there's a medrash, I believe it's in Parshas Vayikra, that talks about buying a kever before. Certainly we encourage people to buy a kever. First of all, it's a big chesed to the family that they don't have to do so. They know where you're being buried. Someone is nifter, they don't have a kever. Some people are afraid to buy a kever. Somehow they think it's bad luck. But the fact is, it's very important. And it's supposedly a sekula for Arichas Yamim. I don't know if I know an exact source for that, but that's what people say. But l'maisa, it's the right thing to do. So the cost consideration is important. I think for certain people, a pre-need funeral is a must. If people, for example, are not financially stable, and they have the ability right now to pay out, or time at least, to pay for a levaya, and so everything is set, that's wonderful. Otherwise, who knows what their grandchildren or their next of kin might decide after 120 years, because they can't afford it, they might just cremate them, which is very often driven by cost. What if there are children that are infirm? There are so many reasons why a person should have a pre-need burial. I happen to be in favor of it, certainly in those situations. I think what's even more important is that once you do it, make sure that everyone who might be in a position to know when they die, that they will know they have the pre-need funeral arrangement. Otherwise, there are people who have pre-need funeral arrangements still get cremated because no one knows they ever made the arrangement. So you have to, not only do it, but make sure that it will be found and people will know about it.
The last question for tonight, before we break for questions, is what is considered proper conduct in a Shiva house? How should the Avel present himself to those people coming in, and how could he, lead a proper tone in the Shiva house?
There are a number of things. Halacha is very clear. First of all, you take your cue from the Avelim. That's the halacha. You don't speak until they speak to you first. I'm going to read something because we put out, it's a lot better because this was done with a lot of cheshbon, so I'll read to you, not all of them, but some ideas. First of all, a Shiva visit is something that potentially is very powerful. Certainly if you are a person that these people look up to, whether it's religious leaders, just as mentors, as friends, as close acquaintances, whatever it might be, you have an opportunity to really strengthen them, and it's a shame to waste it. Besides, there's a chus and the covet of a proper shift. So before entering, take a few minutes to think about what you might say. Very important. Be prepared. You walk in, you really don't know what to say. You're at a loss, and it becomes uncomfortable. And a lot of people are not menachem mobile because they don't know what to say. Your presence is very important. So be there and think about it before. Before you walk in, what might you say? If you're at Levaya, if you knew the person, it's easier. Sometimes, if it's a difficult shiva, I remember being at a shiva years ago, a friend of ours lost a child to SIDS. Most difficult shiva that I probably ever attended in my life. We sat there. The parents were sitting on the floor. They did not say one word. Not a word. We were there for a half hour. We sat there, my wife and I, we both cried. And we walked out. And there were many other people like that. But they told us later how much it meant to them. And the fact that no one said anything. You need to take the cue from them. Sometimes speech is not the thing. Sometimes you just need to feel, to show your emotion, to share that emotion. Nichum is all about what the Avelim need, what they need and want. Let them talk. People come in and tell their own stories. Listen to the Avelim. There may be different Avelim at a house with very different needs. There's a spouse, there are children, there are siblings. They only have different needs. Recognize that. You are there for them. Do not socialize with others. Turn off your cell phones. Halachically, we're not allowed to say shalom to anyone. Make it clear that you are there for them. It's nichum avelim. You're there to be menachem them. Nichum is not about distracting the other. Allow them to cry or express their pain. Listen to the other for the cue of what he or she needs and wants to talk and hear about. Do not come with your prepared speech. Sometimes quiet is what is wanted and needed, just sharing their pain, like we just spoke about. Talk to the heart. I feel your pain. Say ba'ol. Validate their pain and feelings. The last things to say is, I know how you feel. And as everyone says, never say that. Because they feel, how do they know how I feel? There's so many personal aspects to Avelis. How could they know? Of course, there are certain situations. We know people who never lost children, who visit people who lost children. Maybe then it might be more appropriate. But again, listen to them. Keep the focus on the nifter. Elevate the discussion. be something meaningful. Focus on the fine character traits and accomplishment of the nifter. If the other wants to talk but is not focused, sometimes you come in, the other's just rattling. They're just talking, stories, this, joking. You can lead with questions such as, can you tell me about I heard the eulogies were very moving. What did they speak about? Bring it back to that which was meaningful. And then the fact that you need to be there for them after the shiva as well is very important. Do for them what needs to be done. Don't ask, just do. Very often you'll ask and they say, no, I'm fine. Just do what needs to be done. Don't ask. Do not give Avelim a time limit to grieve. Some don'ts. Don't ask questions to satisfy your curiosity. Don't feign closeness when you never had that relationship. Be genuine and sincere. It shows. Do not minimize or discount their pain. Be strong. It's wrong at this stage, unless you are a Rav or a mentor and know them. Allow guilt and self-blame if expressed. Never say, I know how you're feeling. No, here it is. Even if you had a similar experience, I feel your pain is more appropriate. Don't come at an inconvenient time because you need to pay a shiva. I will tell you, as someone who sat shiva a number of times, and someone comes running through the door at 11:30 at night when you're about to collapse. And thank God the last person there, but I had to be here. I just needed to be here. Don't call unless you must. It puts a strain on the other and visitors. What I found, by the way, is very, very moving is to write a letter if you can't be there. A letter that is well written could be a tremendous nichum, and today it could be emailed, and it could be texted. Very, very powerful at times if it's well written. If you're unsure if something is appropriate to say or you don't know what to say, don't say it. Remember, this is the final little point, resist the notion that the purpose of your shiva visit is to cure the other's pain. This mindset often leads to unhelpful comments and monologues. Our goal is to share their pain and let the other grieve. But I think that pretty much covers many, many of the concepts. But remember, Avelis is an opportune moment. It's a teachable moment to people who are there, who may never be at another shiva house where there's a real shiva. To them, shiva is a party. Use it. Use it to teach them, use it to show them the beauty and the depth of Yiddishkeit, of our Masorah, of our Minhagim. There's a lot that we can accomplish if we really put our mind to it.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zohn. There are refreshments available in the back if anybody wants to make a bracha in the social hall, and Rabbi Zohn is available after he comes down for questions. Thank you very much for coming.